This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to Spouses Talking Houses with husband and wife real estate team Jennifer and Brian Frost. Everything you want to know about buying, selling, investing, and owning property. So let's get real about real estate.
Welcome back to Spouses Talking Houses. Today we're going to get real about fair housing. I'm Jennifer, and Brian is not available today, so we're down to one spouse, solo spouse. And I can't do too well at this, otherwise Brian will refuse to come back. So hopefully I'll have a few bloopers.
Do you want me to just sabotage it for you?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right.
Yeah, that'd be great, Ben. So the topic today is fair housing, and I think, racial justice, equal rights, LBGQT protections are all in the general conversation right now. There's a lot going on with police reform and Black Lives Matter and demonstrations, and there's a lot of actions around inclusion and also even with the Me Too movement. So there's been a lot of speaking up and looking for inclusion. And, that is a responsibility that realtors have, is to make sure that housing is available to everyone and that there's not discrimination. So before I get into the topic, I always like to give a little update on our realtor lifestyle. So lifestyle-wise, I'm back to playing tennis, which I'm very happy about. That's outdoors in the fresh air. It's a no-contact sport, which is great. We also had an opportunity to go boating on Lake Winnipesaukee last weekend with my in-laws, and just a perfect day. And now I'm convinced that my next house is going to be on a lake. Another thing that's happened is that New Hampshire has removed, or the stay-at-home order has expired, and now they've implemented safer at home. So we're hoping to still flatten the curve, but we're opening things up a little bit more. And in real estate, that means that open houses are now allowed, that meetings at our office with our clients are now allowed, that we can go work in the office instead of working from home if we want to do that. And then also, this is when people who maybe have been taking a sabbatical from paying their rent or their mortgage have got to pay up or face the consequences. So that's going to be very interesting. And hopefully, if you're in that position, you are having good conversations and open dialogue with your landlord or your mortgage company. So anyway, to get to fair housing, I want to talk about a little bit about the regulations for fair housing, some of the ethics, and some of the practical matters and applications of it. So to start with, through the National Association of Realtors, they have prepared a fair housing declaration, and I wholeheartedly agree with all of this. One is to provide equal professional service, to keep informed about fair housing law and practices, to develop advertising that indicates everyone is welcome, to inform our clients and customers about their rights and responsibilities, to document my efforts to provide professional service, to refuse to tolerate noncompliance, to learn about those who are different from me and celebrate those differences, to take a positive approach to fair housing, and to develop and implement fair housing practices for our firm to carry out in the spirit of this declaration. So I very much agree with that. And I think in this particular area, it maybe doesn't get as much attention because I went ahead and pulled some census statistics, because in the state of New Hampshire, 93.2% of the population is white. So we are not a very diverse area, and I think sometimes that leads to complacency where we don't even really think about diversity. In Massachusetts, that rate was 80.8%. Another interesting thing, as long as I have the census stats here, foreign-born persons in New Hampshire is 6% of the population, and in Massachusetts is 16.5%. We see discrimination housing has a much higher impact for renters than it does for buyers. I mean, it obviously can affect both, but with renters, you have different people who are applying for the same apartment or house to lease, and then the landlord is picking somebody. So there's a lot more opportunities for discrimination in that.
Is that typically an issue that happens in more metropolitan type areas?
I would say so, but that's part of the fact that the metropolitan areas are more diverse to start with. And if there was less segregation and more assimilation, and the zoning really encouraged that, I think it would be a lot different. And there's somewhat of a class distinction to this as well, that it has to do with poverty and criminal history and that sort of thing. And that disproportionately impacts minority population. So they go hand in hand. So owner-occupied housing in New Hampshire is 71% of the housing. We have one of the highest home ownership rates in the country. And I feel this every time I have somebody who's looking for a rental, because it's like finding a needle in a haystack. Massachusetts has 62% of their housing units are owner-occupied. The other thing that I noticed when I was in the statistics is that persons aged under 65 with a disability are 8.8% of the New Hampshire population and 7.9% of the Mass population, because disability is a protected class as well. And speaking of poverty, there's a poverty rate here. 7.6% of the population in New Hampshire falls under the poverty level, and 10% in Massachusetts.
Wow, that's staggering.
It is. And of course, housing is just unbelievably expensive, especially rents. I mean, housing prices have gone up, but the interest rates have gone down. So the affordability index is still actually pretty good for homeowners and home buyers. For renters, though, it's practically doubled what the rental rates are. So that's a tough road for people, especially if they are on disability, retired, single parent, or they're in a service industry, minimum wage type of job type thing. So I'm going to go into what the protected classes are. So there's a couple of layers of fair housing law. So I'm going to start with the federal. So the federal law is that there are 7 protected classes, which include race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, and national origin. Then we have the state, New Hampshire Commission for Human Rights, and that is looking to eliminate discrimination for employment, public accommodations, and the sale or rental of housing. And so we have the original 6 plus a few more: age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, race, creed, color, marital status, familial status, physical or mental disability, or national origin. And the National Association's Code of Ethics, it has a very similar list: race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And one of the nuances of the New Hampshire law, because of the mental disability, is whether drug addiction falls under that or not, and it does not. So smoking and illegal drug use are something that you can choose not to rent to somebody for. But if they've got a physical or a mental disability, you need to accommodate them. So there are a lot of nuances, and we'll get into some examples actually as well. So when you're choosing tenants or buyers, it's pretty obvious how easy it is to violate fair housing. And I want to just mention a few other considerations when you think about fair housing. One is what they call disparate treatment. So as a professional, as a real estate professional, I need to demonstrate that I treat everybody the same. So if I have 4 buyers and I'm sending them listings, I need to be sending them all listings. I need to follow the same process and procedure. If I'm available to show houses for some of my clients and not others, that does not equate to fair housing. So we need to make sure that we offer everybody a variety of choices, and that it's the customer that sets the limits. It's not me who says, "Oh, you don't want to live there," okay? And that we use objective information. You had really brought this up when we talked a little bit about the urban areas, but zoning has a lot to do with discrimination. And current zoning issues right now surround affordable housing and snob zoning, because there are a lot of towns who do not want affordable housing, and so the states have stepped in and said, if you're going to build housing in your town, you need to have a certain percentage that is affordable housing. And a lot of times, an issue with affordable housing is that there's density, and particularly in the suburbs that we're in, we kind of like this, the character of our town is all these large lots, and the homes have large yards and a wooded buffer, etc. Well, affordable housing by definition is going to be more dense and is going to look like an apartment building. And I do see that not in my backyard thing. Oh, that's going to be an eyesore. I don't want all those people living so close to me. Those people is a red flag right there.
No kidding.
Exactly.
So as you know, I live in a relatively new neighborhood that's just under 3 years old, and there's 2 affordable housing units in the neighborhood.
Well, because that was mandated as a percentage, right?
Absolutely. They don't really look any different.
Okay.
They really don't. You can tell they're a little bit smaller than the rest of the houses, maybe a little narrower, but they really don't look any different. So, and there's no rhyme or reason to who's buying those affordable housing houses. They look like everybody else in the neighborhood.
Oh, that's good. Well, that's the right way to do it.
There's absolutely no problem with it. No one is snobbish about it like certain towns that we've run across.
Well, I even see it in the Facebook groups, like, they're ruining the character of our town. We're going to look like a city now, when it comes to retail development or apartment development or anything along those lines. Another thing that we need to be careful about is our advertising. So when we advertise a property, there are words that could subtly influence somebody. So, for example, family-friendly neighborhood. You can't say that. You can say, if you say, it's walking distance to St. Mary's Church, you can't say that. So you're implying that people who don't have kids are not welcome. You're implying that people who are of a different religion are not welcome. So the general rule is to advertise the property and not be talking about the people. So there are a couple of phrases that have been a little bit controversial, but right now HUD, Housing and Urban Development, has said, these are okay. One is master bedroom. So master bedroom, of course, refers to plantations and the master of the house. I still refer to that bedroom as a master bedroom, but I'm hoping we'll come up with a better term.
I honestly never put that correlation together until you just said it.
I never did either until we were at a national conference. So it is a bigger issue in the South.
Oh, that's understandable.
Than it is here, but it does follow. It does follow. And even if you think about like sexual orientation, master bedroom is a male. There's a master and not a mistress. So, you can't advertise and say that, only single people, this is a bachelor apartment, this is a mother-in-law suite. You can't say wheelchairs are not allowed, but you can describe the property. So the property might have a 4th floor walk-up, or there might be jogging trails, or there might be a family room. So something like that, because it's describing the property, is okay. But we need to be careful. Our MLS system actually will flag certain things that if we put them in our description, they'll flag it and they'll say, hey, there's a phrase here that we think could be discriminatory, and could you please reword it? So there are a couple obvious ones here. Newlyweds, no blind, no children, no impaired, no unemployed, not for handicapped, older person, physically fit, Polish, quiet tenants. I like this one, sane tenant only.
Good luck.
Yeah. I would like to have a business relationship with a sane tenant, but I understand mentally ill or mentally handicapped is predictable. And then obviously white only, Indian, near synagogue. We had done the episode about 55 plus housing and age discrimination as far as adult living, adult community is okay when the housing meets the requirements for the 55 or 62 plus. But to say active community or able-bodied or something like that, again, is an exclusive statement. You are excluding people. There are a couple of items that I hope are history now that date back to the 70s and the 80s, and I hope no longer happen. One is called blockbusting. This is illegal. Blockbusting is, hey, I just want you to know that all the white people are moving out of this neighborhood because all these minorities are moving in, and that's going to drop the values of your house. So if you want to, you really need to sell now. And that's a no-no. That's called blockbusting.
That was a big problem in North New Jersey back in the 70s and 80s. Huge problem.
Yeah, it happened in Boston too.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
But I remember in North New Jersey, there was big problems with that. And a lot of people would say, first of all, don't come knock on my door and tell me that. I don't care. I'm not selling because I don't care who lives in the neighborhood.
Excellent.
We're all
Good.
the same.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that didn't happen enough.
Right. Well, and fear is a motivator. So
yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, and one of the best antidotes to racism, whether it's overt or whether it's just a subtle bias or an unconscious bias, is the more that you get to know other people, and the more that you see how much we have in common, the less of that there is. Another practice that has been outlawed is called redlining, and that mostly applies to lenders. So lenders used to have maps, and they would circle certain neighborhoods, and they'd say, well, we don't want to lend in this neighborhood because we think that the values are not good in that neighborhood, which was a great way to just make those neighborhoods even worse, of course. One that applies to realtors that is not legal is called steering. And steering is, this is the town that you want to live in, and this is the town you want to live in. There's a bunch of people who share your religion over on this neighborhood, and that type of thing. There are some exceptions to the fair housing laws. So one of the exceptions is if you are selling a single family home and you're selling it yourself without the use of a real estate professional, because your real estate professional has got to follow the law. I have a sheet here that outlines that. And that owner cannot be somebody who owns more than 3 houses. It can't be somebody who keeps selling houses. So it's really just sort of a one-time thing. If you're a flipper and you did not live in the home and you keep selling homes, you're not going to be able to get along with that. And you also cannot use any sort of discriminatory advertising. The other exception is for rentals when it's owner occupied. So it's very possible that there's somebody who owns a 3-family and they live in one unit and they don't want a family with kids in the building. That is permissible. And so if it's a room or a unit in an owner occupied dwelling and it has no more than 4 families living independently of each other, that does not, however, apply to race or sexual orientation. It's more about age discrimination for that one. And then there are two additional exemptions. One is there's a religious organizations can show preference to members of the same religion when they offer free temporary housing. So, for example, they might shelter refugees, or they might hire somebody to work for them, and they put them up in temporary housing. And the same thing for private clubs. And then the housing for older persons, as we had talked about, which is the 55 plus and the 62 plus. So there's a lot to know. My feeling is treat everybody as well as you can.
That's very good advice. Generally
is the best way about it. I learned today doing research for this, though, who could file a suit for discrimination. So if somebody refused to accept an offer on their house because they didn't like the race or the national origin or the religion of the buyer could sue, the real estate professional could sue, or the federal government can bring suit. So it's not one I would want to be part of for sure. So I've got a few examples that we're going to go into, but before we do, I thought, even though we don't have Brian, we'll talk a little bit about How's the Market, sponsored by Real Value Appraisal. And finally, now that we have concluded our May closings, we're able to see the effect of COVID and of the shutdown, because a lot of what closed in April had gone under agreement at the beginning of March or the end of March, so right during that transition, whereas almost everything that closed in May the majority of those sales would have gone under agreement post-COVID. So here in New Hampshire, our closed sales were down 24.8% compared to a year ago. So we were off by a quarter there.
Wow.
Yeah, that was big. However, the days on the market was down by 4 days, and the percentage of list price was still at 98.6%. And what it came down to was, as we say every time, not that there were less buyers, but that there were less sellers. So new listings for the month of May were down 31%. And that's really where we've seen the impact. The other thing that we saw was that the month supply of inventory last spring was just under 4 months. So that meant that if there were 12 homes for sale, they were selling on average of 3 per month, and that meant that it would take 4 months to sell out the entire inventory. That's what we call our absorption rate. So this time last year, that was at 3.8 months. Today, it's at 2.1. So we've dropped in half as far as what we have for inventory. And it's tough. I've got buyers, and we have to be fast, and we have to be aggressive, and we have to worry about paying too much, and then we have to worry about not paying enough. Because if you don't pay enough, you lose the house, and if you pay too much, you may regret it later.
Are you worried about people overpaying for properties, and then a year, 2, 3 years from now, that property's not nearly worth as much because there was such a low inventory rate at that time?
Yeah, we do. We do. One of the things about the market, though, is I don't recommend that you time the market. It's the roof over your head. So, for example, let's say you were thinking about waiting 3 years to buy because you wanted to see the market turn a little bit. Well, 3 years ago, I had the same concern. So it hasn't happened yet, number one. Number two, if you're spending $2,000 a month in rent times 3 years, that's $72,000. So are you going to make up $72,000 by sitting on the sidelines?
No.
Right. Yeah. So, but we are worried about it, and we have that conversation with our buyers. We say this is a seller's market. Prices are high. We know that you're going to pay a high price. Everybody is right now in this market. But is it a good place for you to live? Do you plan to stay there? So if you're buying on speculation, I would be concerned. But if it's the roof over your head, live in it, enjoy it, and it's better than renting, you know.
Owning is always better than renting.
Well, until you have to run to Home Depot.
Fair enough. Until you have to replace the faucet.
Exactly. So yeah, just back to the new listings situation. So in May, statewide, 2020, we only had 2,000 new homes come on the market, and last year that number was 3,181. So we're down quite a bit on that. So that's how the market is. The market is still a seller's market, and if you are thinking of moving, I can help you, because we can definitely sell your house, and we've been working very hard, as we talked about in the last episode, on how do we find you a house while selling your house. Okay, so I promised you a few examples of fair housing issues. So one of them I mentioned briefly, and that is criminal records check. That has been very standard with rental applications for, I'd say, at least 8 years. And in a 2015 U.S. Supreme Court ruling, there were reasons to exercise caution with that. And so our firm actually no longer offers that as one of our landlord services, because while criminal activity and criminal history is not a protected class, there's a lot of overlap with protected classes. And so a landlord who uses that criteria and doesn't use it consistently could end up under scrutiny. If a consumer files a discrimination complaint against you, usually with the state, it will be investigated. And one of the things they do when they're investigating is they send what they call testers. And so let's just say I'm advertising an apartment for rent. So they may send me a couple of different applicants who are actually working for the state as testers, and have them be in protected classes and not in protected classes, and be looking for any differential in how they are treated. Are they all told the same properties are available? Are they all quoted the same application fees and security deposits and terms and stuff like that? So another thing that comes up quite a bit is about support animals. And this not only comes up in rentals, but it also comes up in condominiums. We just recently had somebody who has a support animal. So there's been because of the disability acts and because of the accommodations that are required, a landlord or condo association is very limited as to being able to refuse an animal in the property. But there are some nuances. So you need to be able to make a reasonable accommodation. And the Fair Housing Act defines assistant animals broadly. So it might be a trained or an untrained animal. They might do work, perform tasks, and provide aid or just therapeutic and emotional support. Industry professionals and landlords have voiced concerns about people exploiting this part of the Fair Housing Act by representing their pets as assistant animals. And there have been, certain websites that will give you a certificate, put your dog's name on it, and that type of thing. So there's some new guidance, and part of the new guidance is that the documentation should be from a licensed medical professional who has personal knowledge of the individual and the disability. Okay. The other thing is that if the animal is not a common household pet, so maybe it's a pony instead of
I can't bring my support koala bear.
Exactly, or your pet alligator or whatever. So then the tenant has the duty to really demonstrate a disability-related therapeutic need to say what exactly this animal can do that another more common type of household pet can't do. And that assistance animal must be needed to address a disability that substantially limits at least one major life activity or major bodily function. And so it still is very tough for landlords and for condo associations. And they can't be asking questions about what the nature of your medical condition is. It's just, do you need this? Do you need this particular animal? I've noticed a lot more apartment complexes are just becoming pet friendly in general, rather than try to navigate all this. But then the landlord or the property owner does still have rights if that animal should damage the property or cause a nuisance to the neighbors or what have you. And then also, as far as accommodations go for disabilities, the property owner, the landlord, does need to be willing to make these accommodations. But if it's something like installing a ramp or doing those type of adjustments to the property, they don't have to pay for that. It's the disabled person who can pay for it. It's the landlord that has to allow it and accommodate it. And there are very often some funds available through different service organizations and to help with that. Another thing that is extremely common in this market right now is what we call love letters. So in a multiple offer situation, it's not uncommon for the buyer to write a cover letter to go with their offer because they want to say, pick me, And, I suggest this to my buyers. We're in a competitive market, and it may help, it may not help, but it very rarely hurts. But it could hurt if the seller makes a decision based on a protected class. And so that is something to think about. Some states have prohibited the use of these love letters. Our Massachusetts and New Hampshire have not. They're actually pretty commonplace. And it's not unusual for that buyer to sell themselves. We're first-time buyers, we just got married, we have 2 cute kids, we have an adorable dog, this is what my profession is. I had one recently where they took a picture of their whole extended family on the deck and talked about their what country their family came from, and how tight-knit and everything they were. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with the buyer doing that, but I think it opens the seller up to, why did you choose the one that you did, and was it because they are the same race and color as you, or or did it have something to do with their orientation? I've had some same-sex couples write love letters, and I've very much wanted them to get the house, and I've thought they wrote lovely letters, but in the back of my mind I'm thinking, even though it's illegal, I really hope that the seller doesn't have a bias in this instance. So that can be tricky territory.
Do you often see, well, I shouldn't say often, but do you sometimes see instances where a seller will have that bias, even though it really makes no sense, that they're moving on, they're moving somewhere else to another state?
It is human nature for the seller to envision the next buyer to be like them. And the longer that they've been in the house and the more emotional attachment they have to it, the more likely that is to happen. So, people who bought a house when their kids were toddlers and then sell it when their kids are 20, they react very strongly to letters that come from people in the same circumstance, the common ground. Also, it could be something in the letter that says, I'm a veteran, or I'm a single mom. I had a buyer not get a house because one of the other letters described the fact that, they'd just gotten divorced and they had a couple of kids and they wanted to stay in the school system and the whole thing. Well, the seller of that property had been in that same circumstance when she bought it. And so she felt a strong emotional tug there.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad, but very interesting at the same time.
Yes, it is. So, in this market, I want my buyer to have any and all advantage that they might have. So, I do have buyers who write those letters. I ask them to focus more on the property and less on the people. And then if you are going to talk people stuff. It might be more about, these are some of our hobbies. This is how we like to spend our time. Our kids play soccer, and we love to watch the Patriots type of thing, because then that's, it could go to ableism, I guess, on the soccer, but it's not about any of the protected class items. Another thing that's recently happened, it's affected actually my Facebook page for Spouses Talking Houses, is on Facebook. You know how those ads follow you around? I get great Facebook ads. Okay, I've been buying from them lately and crossing my fingers it's not all junk, because they're just hitting all of my things that I'm trying to solve in my life. Well, when we are advertising homes for sale, I will very frequently go and pick out demographics to target my Facebook ads. And so I might be looking for somebody who lives within 30 minutes of here. If it's a small first-time buyer house, I might say, give me people who are interested in weddings and that type of thing. But again, that's steering. And so Facebook has changed their policies. And if I'm advertising anything housing related, I really can only go by geographics. I can't pick out ages. I can't pick out interests. I'll have to look and see if, like, I have a waterfront property, if I can still say people who are interested in boating or not. And it has come up with Spouses Talking Houses that if I want to advertise my Spouses Talking Houses Facebook page, it considers that housing advertising, even though I keep trying to tell them that I'm not selling housing here, I'm talking about housing. So we're going to see more and more changes, I think, in the online ads for that as well. Relocation buyers can be kind of tricky about this, because they're coming into the area, they're going to make a decision about what community that they're going to settle in, what school their kids are going to go to, etc. And so they keep they keep asking everybody, what's the best town? What's the best school? I cannot say good school, bad school, good town, bad town. That would be steering. Okay. And so I just have to say, I'm going to give you some websites, and you can look at the school stats. I'm going to suggest that you talk to your new coworkers. You're staying here in a hotel and you're going out to eat. Strike up conversations with people and find out about the towns they live in and ask them questions. So I can give you factual, concrete information, but I cannot say, that's where your people live.
Yeah, don't ever say that.
Don't ever say that. Don't ever say that. I have never said that. Yeah. So that's a tough one, because, they don't know the area and they're looking for information about the area. I do often talk to buyers about resale, though, and say things like, you know what? You like these 3 houses. Well, this one is in a town that's a little bit closer to the highway, and so that's going to be better for resale when the market changes. Like right now, everything's selling well, but when the market changes and there's too much inventory, then the outlying towns are going to get a lot less activity. When it comes to school reputations, what does that even mean? I mean, there are blockbuster movies I don't like, and the hottest restaurant that I don't like, and so a lot of that's individual.
Yeah, it's your personal flavor. What works for you? Is that restaurant good to you? Sure.
Right.
Is it good to me? Maybe not.
Maybe not, yeah. And if it's Brian, never. Actually, no, he'll usually like a restaurant the first 2 times we go. And then after that, he's like, I don't really like that place anymore.
The bread was just a little soggy. Exactly. We're never going there again.
And the other thing about schools is that's very individual, like to your child and to your expectations. So for schools, I encourage people not just to look at stats, but if school is in session, which obviously it is not right now, but if it's during the school year, see if you can arrange a visit. Some of the towns are very accommodating about visits and tours, and some not so much. But it's like a job interview. You start off with the job description and the resume, and you're sort of making a match on paper, but then you meet in person to see if it clicks. And I think not all kids learn in exactly the same environment, and certainly the schools have personalities. They're not all exactly the same, and it's not just about the test scores. So, something else that I learned I did not know was that multifamily buildings that are built after 1991 have some restrictions. So, generally speaking, once we get over 3 stories, it's going to have an elevator. But if you build a multifamily building after 1991 and it does not have an elevator, then you have to make sure that your first floor entrance and unit is handicap accessible. Okay, and that's also really good for people who are looking at that 55 plus housing and they're wanting things like very few steps. Like they're perfectly mobile and able right now, but they're thinking towards the future and they're saying, I don't want a tub, I want a step-in shower, and I don't want a lot of steps up to my front door. I only want 2 or 3. So that's a little bit of a summary. One of the things to look for is in a real estate office, there should be a poster that is prominently displayed regarding fair housing. On flyers and business cards and advertising, we are not mandated, but we often voluntarily will use that equal housing opportunity little house logo. On our website for Best Move Team, we've got the logo down at the bottom of the site, and you can click on it, and it actually has a fair housing statement. So we mention all the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, Equal Opportunity Act, and then for the home seller, you should know that you are obligated not to discriminate. You may not instruct a licensed broker to discriminate on your behalf. And then for a home seeker, it says what you have the right to expect. And then it even tells you where you can go with a complaint if you feel that the law has been violated. So hopefully that was interesting to you. And I appreciate you being with us once again for this episode of Spouses Talking Houses, where we got real about fair housing. I'd like to ask you to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. And in addition to that, if you have any questions that you would like us to answer, please post them on our Facebook page, Spouses Talking Houses, or you can email or text me. Thanks.
Music courtesy of the Eric Lindbergh Trio. Please visit his website at www.ericlindberghworld.com. Jennifer and Brian are licensed to practice real estate in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Brian is also a certified general appraiser in New Hampshire. They are not lawyers, accountants, home inspectors, or therapists. Real estate customs and rules may be different in your area. Each Keller Williams Realty office is independently owned and operated. The Realtor name is trademarked to members of the National Association of Realtors. If you are currently under contract with a real estate agent, this is not intended as a solicitation. Views expressed on this podcast by Jennifer may not be shared by Brian and vice versa, nor are they necessarily the views of Keller Williams Realty.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Café, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.